Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our event on financing the future, investing in sustainable growth. We are very honored to have Werner Hoyer, the president of the European Investment Bank, Ralf Brinkhaus, the parliamentary leader of the CDU-CSU in the German Bundestag, and Markus Steilemann, the chief executive officer of Covestro, as our panelists today. And the event will be chaired by Beate Biankowska from the Grantham Institute on Climate Change and Environment. I am handing over to you, Ms. Biankowska.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this fantastic event, because this is today more apparent than ever that we should be having this discussion. And let me share with you some quick thoughts at the beginning, because we meet today, that is 11 months after many countries across Europe introduced lockdown measures. This is when it became apparent that business as usual will no longer be possible for many months ahead. Actually, it is still impossible today, as the pandemic risk is still high. However, as the vaccination reaches the most vulnerable society groups, we should think already beyond the pandemic. What's tomorrow? What's ahead? And thus, the main question rises, do we want to go back to the business as usual, rebuilding the economy on the same assumptions as before, or do we want to use the recovery phase, investment allocated for this purpose, to build a sustainable economic system, a system in which environmental and social aspects are no longer subject to the rate of economic growth, a system which is climate friendly and socially inclusive. And with this, I want to introduce the topic of today's session, financing the future, investing in sustainable growth. I want to as well say a good afternoon to the guest, that honorable guest that we have with us. And I want to share with you the agenda very quickly before we move to the main part. So at the beginning, you will hear your guest interventions, which will take some amount of time, around 10 minutes. Then we will move to the panel discussion with audience. And apologies, without audience, because I have prepared some questions to our panelists, and then we will move to the panel discussion with audience. So please put your question that you have to panelists in the chat. And then we will close the meeting. There are some rules that I want to share with you, but I'm sure everyone is aware of this because we've been through this kind of meetings for many months already. So please mute yourself once you're entering. If you have any question, submit in chat. If you face any technical problems, also submit in chat, because there is a group waiting for you of supporters that can always help you with any kind of questions or problems that you have. So moving to the main part, I want to introduce you the first speaker of today. And this will be President Werner Hoyer, who is a politician and economist, former member of Bundestag, former Minister of State and at the Foreign Office in the second cabinet of Angela Merkel, and since 2012, President of the European Investment Bank. Under his leadership, EIB became the leading multinational bank to advance on climate change. This is not only about advocacy, but it's also about the hard targets, including a 50% target of the EIB investments to be allocated to the climate and environment by 2025. Therefore, I leave the floor to Mr. Hoyer, who will share with you more insights into recovery from pandemic, and which will be focused a lot around the sustainable growth. Mr. Hoyer, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brinkhouse, and thank you very much for inviting me, for giving me the floor. And hi to my old colleague, Ralf Brinkhaus, and a good business partner, Markus Steilemann. It's a pleasure to be on the panel together with you. You referred to my time in the Foreign Office under Angela Merkel, but I need to go back a little bit longer, 26 years. It was ago when Chancellor Helmut Kohl asked me, to my great surprise, by the way, to become Minister of State in the Foreign Office at that time. And Kohl and his Foreign Minister, Klaus Kinkel, they had the opportunity and the need to appoint someone to represent Germany in the so-called reflection group and later in the Intergovernmental Conference that led to the preparation, or that led to the Treaty of Amsterdam. This was the next major European treaty after Maastricht and therefore a very important matter for Chancellor Kohl. I was, of course, very flattered by his offer, and I found the idea to immerse myself in questions regarding the future of Europe once again fascinating. A key insight that I remember from this time is that at the end of the day, the European integration is nothing else than the organization of the self-assertion of us Europeans in an ever more globalized world. This idea still bears a lot of relevance today, in my view. In fact, if there is one thing that I criticize, it is that we have somewhat lost track of it in recent years, and that we conduct European policy often in a rather unstrategic way. Helmut Kohl, who still had suffered through the end of World War II, had a completely different historical approach to this issue. And I think sometimes we should get to this historical and strategic perspective. After all, we have to ask ourselves, how should we as Germans, English, French, Polish, position ourselves between the great powers going forward, the United States, China, and maybe one day again Russia. Others will follow. We must not underestimate them. We can only do this together as Europeans. Emmanuel Macron's famous phrase, which he borrowed from the former Belgian Prime Minister Paul-Henri Spaak, comes to mind in this context. There are only two types of states in Europe: small states and small states that have not yet noticed that they are small. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the first point of my introduction. A strong European Union is more important today than ever if we want to make sure that our values and interests carry sufficient weight in a globalized world. At the same time, and this is my second point, this in and by itself will not be enough to maintain the EU in its current shape and form. Only if Europe addresses also the concerns of its citizens will we be able to effectively combat the growing Euroscepticism of recent years and ensure a strong Europe going forward. This applies not only to the EU, by the way, but to democracies all over the world. The events in Washington just a few weeks ago are sad proof of this. The number one policy priority is at the moment, without any doubt, the fight against the pandemic. Until we have beaten the virus by vaccinating a large part of our populations, there will be no recovery, but merely an economy in a perpetual start-stop mode. At the EIB, we have been aware of this since early on in the pandemic. That is why we have invested heavily in R&D activities in the life sciences sector over many years. We were, for example, one of the first ones to support the development of the BioNTech vaccine, the company with which we have already worked closely before the corona, because we had financed their cancer research and development for quite a few years. So we knew them when they knocked on our doors at the beginning of last year, when I was not even able to spell COVID correctly. And they said already, maybe the technology that we have developed in the context of our medications can be used in the context of medication against or vaccine against COVID-19. It's not just about managing investment risks through this diversification, which we knew very early on that BioNTech would probably win the race for the first licensed vaccine. But it's about being able to meet different needs in terms of infrastructure and ensure sufficient quantities of vaccines quickly. Our health experts, and I think we have the best life science department of any bank, I also have been working intensively on an impressive portfolio of therapeutics. People tend to forget now, with the excitement about vaccines, that many people are far from being, and in some cases due to pre-existing conditions never will be, vaccinated. For them, tailor-made treatments are essential as well. I'm confident that these and other investments will contribute to our progress in the fight against the pandemic and allow for a steady transition to a more normal life and economy very soon. As important as the fight against the pandemic is, we must not forget about the other problems that have contributed to the rise of populist forces on both sides of the Atlantic, often long before the corona pandemic. By the way, just think of Brexit. These problems will not be magically swept aside once the virus disappears. It's therefore important that in addition to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, we urgently provide answers to the other major challenges of our time. For me, there are at least four. First, weak growth combined with rising asset prices, especially real estate. Second, the feeling in parts of Europe of being left behind. Third, the fear of migration and terrorism, which calls into question the basic idea of a Europe without borders. And fourth, and finally, the fight against climate change. It is beyond the scope of this discussion to go into each of these in detail. So let me just say they all have one thing in common. We will not overcome any of them as long as we do not manage to trigger more private sector investments, especially in the areas of digitalization, climate technologies, and in structurally weak regions. Our starting position is actually rather good. Whether digitalization, robotics, or synthetic biology, the technical revolution is in full swing. And artificial intelligence, cloud computing, 5G, and the Internet of Things will lead to further technological leaps in the coming years. If we invest well, these technologies could help us strengthen Europe's economic position, create jobs, and at the same time help us become emission neutral by 2050. I deliberately say they could, because what we are currently seeing is not very encouraging. Many firms are cutting back their investment activities, in particular in the area of digitalization and clean tech. For them, short-term viability through leveraging Trump's investment in long-term competitiveness. And this is understandable in view of the pressure under which they are presently are. Understandable from an individual point of view, but the consequences is that while we are likely to see a rebound in GDP growth in the second half of the year, aggregate investment activities will likely remain weak for years to come. We must counteract this urgently. We simply cannot afford another lost decade in terms of investment. To this end, it will be crucial that we improve the economic framework conditions in Europe, and this is a basic prerequisite for more investment activities in the future. The best European growth policy is and remains the strengthening of the internal market. This is about the digital market and the capital market, whereas the US and China each have a single digital market and a common capital market each. We allow ourselves to have 27 digital markets in Europe. That is an enormous competitive disadvantage. We also need more innovators with entrepreneurial spirit to tackle the current challenges. Only they can provide the decisive impetus to change course. Mr. Steilemann is a perfect example of this. I'm very glad that he's here today and willing to share a few thoughts with us later on. And we need an economic stimulus package that helps companies to implement their investment plans, even under difficult circumstances. Public investment is necessary, in particular in areas such as infrastructure and so forth, but all other investments belong in the hands of the private sector, which also must bear the entrepreneurial risks. And we at the EU Bank have made very good experience with the so-called Juncker plan, in which we took on limited investment risks of the private sector to so incentivize firms to engage in more strategic investments. And that went very, very well. We need to learn from this when we now move into InvestEU. I think we can and we should learn. Let me conclude by saying a few words about the US, echoing something that Mr. Brinkhouse recently said. While it is only natural that in times of crisis like these, everybody focuses on themselves, we mustn't forget what is happening around us. We only defeat this pandemic by working together at the international level. And the same goes for the fight against climate change and other problems without passports, as Kofi Annan would have called it. A key element in all this is the transatlantic framework, the teamwork that has ensured peace and prosperity in Europe for so many decades. With the election of President Biden, we can pick up where we have left it. We have so much to gain from a close cooperation with the US. What is important, however, is that Europe no longer hides behind America. Some of the questions that Mr. Biden will raise are the same ones that Mr. Trump raised, and in addition, Mr. Obama had raised as well. And we have not given the responses yet. If we want transatlantic relations to work and the idea of a rules-based, enlightened, democratic West to be filled again with life, then Europe must finally become an ally of equal footing. European strategic autonomy and transatlantic partnership are not contradictory, as is so often suggested. One requires the other. As the EU bank, we already contribute to EU's global visibility, by the way, also in the context of COVID. In recent months, for example, we have not only financed the development of different vaccines in Europe, but with the help of the European Commission and the so-called COVAX facility, we are supporting also the development of a COVID vaccine in middle and low-income countries. And as the EU Climate Bank, you referred to this, Ms. Brinkowska, we're not just financing the development of cutting-edge climate technologies in Europe, but we are actively contributing to the implementation of the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement worldwide. So that brings me to my end. If we want to secure and promote our interests and values in the world, then we are dependent on working together closely in Europe and also hand in hand together with our partners in the world. And we must deliver on the ambitious goals that we have set ourselves, especially in terms of productivity growth, cohesion, climate change, and development. And I see a very clear link between innovation, climate action, and development. With this in mind, let's go to work. I look forward to your ideas and the discussion with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, President Hoyer. Actually, we'll be talking about Paris alignment, including Paris alignment of EIB and innovation during the panel. Let me turn now to our next speaker, who is, I shouldn't introduce him like with many details to the German speakers, but to do the justice for all participants of this discussion, let me introduce it properly. The second speaker is today Ralph Brinkhaus. He's a politician, economist, parliamentary leader of the CDU-CSU in the German Bundestag, and member of the Bundestag for over a decade. Mr. Brinkhaus is in one of your recent speeches in Bundestag, you said that Nachhaltigkeit ist mehr als Klima. So for non-German speakers, sustainability is more than climate. I guess at this moment when I said it, our audience is already curious to learn about your approach to sustainable growth, which goes beyond the climate. Mr. Brinkhouse, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the cliffhanger or the spoiler to my introduction remarks. First of all, thank you very much to the whole team for the invitation. It's an honor to be part of this really outstanding event, and congratulations to the whole team for the perfect organization under very unusual circumstances. And this LSE German Symposium is in the meanwhile a tradition, highly regarded not only in London, but also in Germany. And thank you very much for not interrupting this tradition in this very unusual times or challenging times, because we are all facing in these days, and not only in the countries of Europe, and giving me the opportunity to stress the fact that UK is still a part of Europe, but also for the rest of the world, it's the biggest catastrophe, the biggest threat we have had since 1945. And you will be surprised in mentioning by me that the world is not too bad in fighting against this pandemic, because the development of several vaccines within a year is a proof for the efficiency of mankind. And by the way, this was an international process with a lot of cooperation, of course, a lot of competition. But the result is not only the work of mankind in the Western world, but in the whole world. And this is a new experience, and this is a really good experience. But, and now is coming the but, this pandemic has also shown the weaknesses of modern world. And to be honest, we could have been prepared for COVID, because we were totally aware of the risk of pandemics, and not only because of some bad Hollywood movies, but also out of the very real experience we had made in Asia with the pig flu and other diseases. But, and I guess this is not only the problem of the current generation of politicians, we have been totally focused on handling today, but not the threats and the challenges of our future. And to giving you one example, not very diplomatic, but how many management capacity we boast in UK and Europe have wasted and certainly will waste in handling the Brexit. So this is not an official German statement, political statement, but my personal opinion. And this leads me to the subject of our afternoon discussion. It's more than a good idea to choose the motto "New Beginnings" for the whole symposium. New beginnings, not only because of the post-Brexit time, but new beginnings because I guess that we really need to have a new beginning in several fields of society and politics after having survived this pandemic. And one very important field is financing the future, investing in sustainable growth, a headline for this afternoon. And this headline is covering three keywords: financing, investing, and sustainable. And I would like to give you for each of these keywords three impulses and probably or perhaps as a base for the further discussions. First keyword, financing. As a former tax consultant, accountant, finance director, it's a pleasure to start with financing, because we always forgot that most of the efforts of men have to be financed, and many promising projects have failed because of a lack of finance. And so I would like to highlight 3 points within this field of finance. First point, the foundation walls, the base for financing of investment in sustainable growth should not be based on public debt. And now you're asking why. Every company is financing its investment on debt. What is the contradiction, and what is happening in the public that this is not possible? This is my deep experience out of 10 years of politics, professional politics, that it is a tremendous temptation for every politician to postpone all the burdens of today to the next generation. And therefore, I really advocate to say every generation has to finance its own challenges, and we have to finance our sustainable growth. Second remark, we are still at the keyword financing. The foundation walls and the base for financing of investments in sustainable growth should not be based on regulation. In enforcing money streams into certain fields predefined by politics. This has not worked in the past, and this will not work in the future. And the third point, and this is not very modern in these times, is I still believe in markets. So the only thing politics can do is organizing markets, and we have been very successful in organizing markets for the field of the avoidance of CO2 emissions. We have installed the European emission trading system, a short-hedging market for CO2 emissions. And I guess it's the best vehicle to foster financing in the fight against climate change. And we as Germans, we would like to enlarge it to the fields of mobility and the producing of heat for households and production processes. So first keyword, financing. Second keyword, investing. Was and also 3 impulses for investing. First, investing needs long-term perspectives. Investing means a long-term perspective. We must leave the world of short-term ideas. And I say this being well aware of the fact that short-term return on investment is a temptation for every politician, too often trapped in thinking from election to election. And investing means thinking not in weeks, not in months, not in years, but in decades. Second impulse for the keyword investing, risk. Investing means having risk. We tend to ask for a risk-free world. This will not work. You have to have the courage to fail. And I would like to quote the former Formula One car driver, worldwide champion Mario Andretti. And he said, if everything seems under control, you are not going fast enough. We have to take risk for our sustainable growth. And the third point, also related to investing, is gain is profit. And one hand to this, there is not only the monetary gain of investment, but also gains for society and other things, and we have to keep it in mind. Now, the third keyword after financing, after investing, is the keyword sustainability. First impulse, the fight against climate change is decisive. By the way, not for the planet, but for mankind, because the Earth will survive. This is not a question. It's a question for us to survive. It's a question for our living beings to survive. And so we are in an obligation to fight against climate change. But as you have mentioned in the introduction, sustainability is more than fighting against climate change. We have 70 sustainable development goals of the United Nations, and it's very interesting. It's starting with no poverty. It's about gender equality. It's about innovation. It's now climate action, of course. It's life on land, and it's peace, and so many other things. And in talking about sustainability, we should also talk about the other 16 sustainable development goals, because, and this is very important, we should keep in mind that everything is connected with everything. Very simple words, but very true words. And the third impulse to the keyword sustainability is there is no contradiction between sustainability and growth. Because as long as you do not reduce growth on getting more and more, so reducing growth on quantity, but enlarge it in getting more quality and having a better and better life, I guess there is no contradiction between sustainability and growth, and we should keep it in mind. So 3 keywords, 3 impulses for every keyword, 1 closing remark. So as a German, I had to look up the meaning of the word sustainable in the Cambridge Dictionary, of course. And there is one core meaning. Sustainability meaning able to continue over a period of time. And there's one enlarged meaning. The Cambridge Dictionary is saying cause little or no damage to environment and therefore able to continue for a long time. And I was wondering for this afternoon, shall we talk about sustainable growth in the first meaning, only to say being able to continue over a period of time? Or shall we talk about the second meaning, cause little or no damage to environment and therefore able to continue for a long time? I guess there is no alternative. We can only talk about the second meaning, but without keeping in mind that we cause no damage to other people, to the environment, I guess we cannot talk about sustainable growth. And so this question I asked to myself was not a smart question. There will be no growth except sustainable growth in our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for such a charismatic three words by 3 words. And I believe what you said, especially about the 3 words about the investment, should be heard by every investor. And I think they were heard by many future investors among us here today. And with this, after hearing two representatives of the public sector, we are turning to private sector for the balance. And with this, we turn to Dr. Markus Steilemann, who is the CEO of Covestro. And from the company website, Mr. Steilemann, I read that we can read there that the strategy focus of your work is the comprehensive orientation of the company towards a fully circular economy. So is the circular economy now the clue for understanding Covestro's strategy on sustainability? And with this, I'm giving the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot to my very distinguished, let's say, panel fellow panel members, Ralf Brinkhaus, as well as Dr. Werner Heuer, and also Beata, to you for this I would say not challenging, but rightful introduction, because that is exactly what our company is heading towards. But before I get there, you might wonder why the brightness in this room is going up and down. Actually, I'm sitting in our new corporate headquarters in Leverkusen, Germany, and it is a gold LEED certified building. That means there is some kind of artificial intelligence telling me that there is sufficient, let's say, external light and daylight coming in. That's why the artificial light is constantly going on and off. So please bear with me if it's getting darker or brighter here in this room. It is just because somebody tells me that I could save some energy. So having said that, if you look at the topic of today, industry as driver of climate neutral economy, I would like to make a few remarks on how public and private sector can work together. But for me, it is important, and I think Ralf Brinkhaus as well as also Werner Heuer referred to that already in their contributions today, The public sector has a very specific role to play. And the specific role is that the public sector should flank enormous industrial transformational needs that we have to reach a climate neutral as well as truly sustainable future. So let me build around that statement that I just made as an introductory statement for my contribution today. We need a great reset, and that is the great reset is the only way forward to really use this window of opportunity now for a truly sustainable future. And I would say despite, or maybe just because or through Corona, there have been growing commitments in politics, in society, as well as companies on a creation of a sustainable future. We have seen that recently with China, for example's 2060 goal of becoming climate neutral. The US, as Werner Hoyer rightfully outlined, returning back to the table and returning back to the Paris Agreement, but also with the European Green Deal, which from my perspective should be a sustainable Green Deal and not only a Green Deal. Because, as Ralf Brinkhaus pointed out rightfully, we need to reach climate neutrality while at the same time driving prosperity and driving growth, even though growth could be defined in a different way. That's where I agree, but we need to tackle all three of them and cannot just focus on climate neutrality in this context. So creating sustainable, resilient economies, which also then can cope with crisis situations that will also hit us in the future without too much government intervention, is absolutely key. If you think about the numbers speak a very clear language. A green recovery plan can add up to 1.1 percentage point to global economic growth, according to the International Energy Agency. It might as well also save or even create roughly 9 million jobs each and every year over the next 2 years, also according to the International Energy Agency. In that context, it is really important that the EU Green Deal has the chance to become a global blueprint for sustainable growth. So we have to, and Werner Hoyer very much elaborated with a lot of passion to that, we have to revive the European product, and we have to make sure that we prevail in geopolitics and that we also prevail in that context and be competitive against, for example, preponderance of China as well as the United States. So for me, a common vision, therefore, is a good starting point, and I feel already listening to what Ralf Brinkhaus and Werner Hoyer have said, that we're on the right way forward. We need to make circular economy, and that's where the vision of our company comes from, the global guiding principles, because it is key to climate neutrality, because it makes sure that we have resource efficiency and environmental protection at the same time. Because linear patterns that we were used to build our economy model and our consumption patterns have really had their days, and they have brought us where we are today, but they're not good enough to create a sustainable future. Therefore, sustainable lifestyles, consumptions, as well as production methods are indispensable in a circular context, and circular economy is an integral part of a Green Deal. Having said that, we now need the industry as a driving force. And I can say that because I'm a chemist by training. And if you think about it, what we have to achieve for a circular economy, it's all about converting substances and also the conversion of materials. And chemistry is the science of conversion of materials. And that's why the industry is an indispensable part of the solution and for a truly sustainable future. Just think about it, that the chemical industry is at the heart, and the private sector, therefore, is at the heart of making value chains more sustainable. Think about e-mobility. Think about renewable energy, net zero buildings, hydrogen, whatever you take, we always need a strong industrial base. We always need a strong chemical industry. Batteries, wind turbines, insulation materials, electrolysis to produce hydrogen. Nothing of that would work without materials. Nothing of that would work without engineers. Nothing out of that would work without natural science and therefore chemistry. If you take chemical products, even though they are today still based on fossil fuels, they can save up to 2.6 times of the greenhouse gas emissions that were required to produce them over their life cycle, according to a study from the American Chemical Society. However, and we need to address that as well, the industry is, as of today, a major emitter and therefore part of the problem. If you look at the entire industrial contribution, globally, the industrial sector stands for more than 18% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to that, the chemical industry represents 7% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. However, and that's now a little bit light at the end of the tunnel, if you compare 1991 to 2017, we have seen that despite the fact that the chemical sector has grown by more than 84%, it has reduced its absolute carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by 57%. So we have demonstrated that the change is possible and that you can combine climate as well as growth at the same time. We need therefore now a more radical approach for a huge transformation, as that is the only thing and the true thing that is needed to enable climate neutral production. Why is it so important to be very ambitious today? Every study that you can get from consultants tells you the ambitious goal to be climate neutral 2050 is possible, but the industry must quit fossil fuels by defossilizing its energy supply and at the same time defossilizing also its raw material base. And why is it so important to think now about it very radically? Because the industry normally invests for 20 to 30 to 40 years. That means the investments we will make today will still be around in the year 2050. And that's why now we have to drive for the change. So we need to completely switch to renewable energy and alternative feedstock. For example, carbon dioxide. Yes, you can make this climate gas and greenhouse gas really a feedstock for the chemical industry. We need to talk about biomass. We need to talk about waste. That entails an enormous rebuilding of production as well as the technological base that we use. And here, coming back to what Werner Heuer said, investment is absolutely key, because delivering on the Paris Agreement will require, according to a recent consultancy study, $75 trillion in investment. And only for the EU to reach a net zero emission would require 28 trillion euros in clean technologies over the next 30 years. So to finance green recovery, the entire financial system has to move towards that direction. What does it mean? Engaging and stimulating all companies across industries in their transition. Governments, central banks, and financial regulators need to complement private sector shift by, for example, challenging more of the global GDP into green energy, while at the same time shifting investment away from fossil fuels, because that could reduce emissions by up to half already in this decade, according to the International Energy Agency. The private sector at the same time has to carry the bulk of investments. Addressing, therefore, environmental, societal, and governance issues proactively can deliver substantial financial rewards, not only for societies, but also for individual companies. And therefore, coming back to what has been mentioned before and also by Ralf Brinkhaus, planning security and thinking beyond, let's say, one term and re-election terms is absolutely needed. Once again, we need 20, 30 years to keep our assets running and get the respective returns. So industry needs targeted support from the public sector. More directed distribution of, for example, incentives and public money is necessary, because today only 5% of total stimulus in key economies is targeted at incentivizing structural change in industry, according to a recent study from Accenture. That comes with the danger of cementing the status quo that we have and actually go back to pre-crisis structure or even manifesting them. So politics is desperately needed as framework. Support innovation decisions for companies for a circular economy transformation. Make, for example, European or national tax laws to support investments and being innovation friendly. Currently, we have international tax competition that increases the inequalities and does not provide a level playing field. But that is necessary as we are globally acting industries and companies. Tax cuts can also have a fundamentally positive impact on private investment activities. Please provide subsidies, guidelines that do not prevent investment decisions in this context and ensure long-term supply of green energy at the lowest cost possible. set the tone of public debate towards technology openness and fact-based decisions, promote societal acceptance of industry and infrastructure projects where I believe today there could be much more done in a much more positive way, and also shift societal norms. What do I mean with social norms? What do I mean with that? Consumer and investor expectations to zero carbon must become the new normal, and promote in a way the willingness to pay for more expensive green products, at least for a transitionary period, and solutions, because today just 37% of consumers are prepared to pay more for premium. Let me conclude. The industry is ready. The industry is eager to contribute its share. The public sector should flank enormous transformation to drive the change, and only jointly we will reach both sustainability and growth. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Steilemann. And with this, we are turning to the second part of today's discussion, that is the panel discussion. And I will include audience shortly, being mindful of the time. So out of my three big teams with 3 times 3, just referring to Mr. Brinkhouse and his concept, I made the shortcuts, and I'll just address one question to every speaker of our speakers. So starting with the big topic of net zero. Many governments have set net zero targets, including Germany. Germany committed to become greenhouse neutral by 2050. This is my question to you, Mr. Brinkhouse. How to achieve it, according to you? How to reconcile the net zero by 2050 with the black zero approach? What will be the key environmental and social benefits? And at the same time, what will be the cost of achieving the net zero?
So I guess the question would be, what will be the cost of not reaching this target? I guess this is a more important question. So I guess we do not have any alternative to it. And I guess that we can create a success model out of it. So saying, okay, it's a burden to reach this target. It's a one argumentation. The other is, okay, we can make a success model out of it, because in Germany, we have the innovation capacity. We have the technology, we have the will, we have the financial wealth, and I guess we can do a lot together. And this is very important, and not only dedicated to Werner Hoyer, together with our European partners, because I guess we can only solve this challenge together with our European partners. And I guess the key words are markets and technology. So when we have launched our climate change package 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, we have been criticized a lot, because people were asking us, okay, so you have made up a target, but you do not know how to reach this target. And then I'm always pointing to this, because this iPhone or this smartphone, not doing any advertising for any company, wasn't invented 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, I could not have imagined what I can do with this gadget here. And so I really trust in technology and innovation to reach its targets. It's hydrogen, it's other technologies. It's, by the way, a lot of IT technology to control processes, to be better in processes, to improve it. And I guess the right point is what Mr. Steilemann has mentioned. This process has to be done by our companies, but it has to be flanked by the public sector. With markets, as I already have mentioned, this emission trading system, for example, with taxes, with putting more public money into innovation, into research, and into development. But the steps which have to be made, or which have to be made by the companies. And I guess this is a philosophy, and I'm quite optimistic. So we have not already solved, but we are on a good way to solve this pandemic problem within 1 year with this vaccines. And we should be able to solve the climate change problem within the next decade with all this knowledge and creativity of people on the world.
Thank you for a very optimistic approach to this. Now turning to President Hoyer. So, and focusing on two big things, trying to merge it into one, that is Paris alignment, how to reach it, and at the same time, just transition. So let me phrase it. In a recent address to the Climate Ambition Summit 2020, your President Hoyer mentioned that EIB has stopped financing fossil fuel projects, including natural gas, and that EIB will be the first multinational bank to be Paris aligned by the end of this year. Could you please therefore share more insights on key geopolitical, environmental and social benefits and the cost of reaching these targets, especially being mindful of the just transition and widely understood, so going beyond Europe?
Wow, you need some patience now with me. There's quite a bouquet of questions which I'm happy to address as well as I can. Number one, EIB is far ahead of, I would say, of the multilateral development banks or most national development banks, but the private sector is ahead, and it's quite amazing. Sometimes the private sector is far behind, but in this case they're ahead. Look at this CEO letter that the head of BlackRock sent around last week, where they clearly say what they do not want to have on their balance sheets anymore is nice things which will end up as stranded assets within 10, 15, or 20 years. So there is an economic rationale behind this move out of fossil fuels, not just a romantic one or an ecological one. This is an economic rationale behind it. And I'm extremely encouraged what is happening in this field. And Mr. Steilemann is representing a company which is top-notch when it comes to new technologies, for instance, in the circular economy, and this is something where we can do a lot. There is one thing is also quite clear when we talk about new energy lending policy of our institution and of others. Once you do this or make this huge structural change, you must help. Even if the best will, the last miner who will come out of a coal mine in Silesia will not turn into the head of a digital startup in 2 weeks. So there will be transitions needed. So the whole new Green Deal can only work in context with a just transition package. And this is what the European Union, the federal government in Germany and others, and the EU Bank are working on. This is quite clear. I think we have achieved the first goal, that is, since the 1st of January, we are fully Paris aligned. 50% of our projects are expected to be climate related by 2025. But what is much more important is the other 50% of our projects must not undermine the positive effects of climate action. And that means we do not do harm with the rest of the projects which are not directly climate related. And this is a trend that I see more and more in the private sector, in the private banking system. I've been surprised at events like Davos in the last years or so when the managers of big asset holding companies or private banks told me their asset holders expect us to move into this direction because they do not want to sit on stranded assets one day or be considered guilty for a ruining of the planet. And we don't have very much time. I think we need to get it done very, very quickly. And therefore, we cannot be ambitious enough. We have seen in this crisis that Churchill was right. Never miss a good crisis. This is a terrible crisis, but we must not miss it because we learn from it. We have learned how terrible we are when it comes to digitization. This can be found everywhere in Europe. It's a disaster, but we learn from it. And also we need to learn that when we rebuild our economy, we need to build under the headline of sustainability and not simply build back where we were 12 months ago. This is the key. Then I think investment in the future, and we need enormous investments. For instance, we need to multiply the electricity production for Africa within the next 20 years by the factor of 5. So we can invite the Chinese coal companies to come in and provide this electricity, or the American shale gas companies, or we can go there with new technologies. And the Europeans still have an edge when it comes to top-notch technologies in the field of energy efficiency and renewables. And therefore, I think we should act quickly, and we should act on the global scale and not just believe we can solve the climate issues of the world by reducing the emissions in Europe, which only make up 8% of the overall CO2 emissions, for instance.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive answer. Now we're turning to Mr. Steilemann, and we will focus on innovation. So only yesterday, Bloomberg released its latest innovation index, assessing countries on 7 metrics, including R&D expenditures, productivity, patents, education. However, in today's world, measuring innovation by these traditional metrics may seem not sufficient anymore. Because we should look, as Mr. Steilemann, you alluded to in your intervention, to the whole system change, to the full, at the level of every supplier. So therefore, we need to ask us a question about the sustainability-led innovation, what kind of role it should play. And with this, I want to ask you, Mr. Steilemann, what is your approach to innovation at Covestro, thinking through the lenses of sustainability-led innovation? And do you have any examples of sustainability-led technologies that being developed, or basically how your processes are securing the sustainability-led technologies to be developed in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Beata. That's a very challenging question, honestly speaking, because it includes a lot of many different aspects, so to say. And if you look into the ESG ratings, for example, currently in the world, we have more than 700, 700 systems out there which claim that they are able to measure how sustainable a corporation and a company is. And just imagine now, if everybody is claiming, well, we are the only truth, and if you don't follow our system, you screw up as a corporation. That's one of the key challenges we are currently facing. So we are listed in with some of those ESG rankings, and some of those ESG rankings also looking into innovation capabilities and how we deploy our money in terms of innovation programs and projects. And here, for me, it is absolutely essential that we take existing measures that are widely accepted, for example. And for us, since many years already, is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals a very, very good North Star that we can actually orient our research and development activities to. We have a very sophisticated, detailed process where we are ranking all our innovation projects. And what we're aiming for is that by 2025, 80% of the innovation money we spend is contributing significantly to one or more of the sustainability development goals of the United Nations. Why is that important? It is important because it addresses exactly what we have said before, that sustainability goes way beyond climate change. It goes, for example, also towards social justice. It goes towards equal opportunities. It goes also towards participation of more and more people in the wealth that we are creating, and so on and so forth. And that is what we as Covestro already have since many, many years as a guiding principle for our entire, let's say, innovation pipeline. And to give you a concrete example, not necessarily, let's say, on chemical issues, but a very core topic that I mentioned earlier in my intervention here. We developed a process for, let's say, for an industry like ours, quick time, only a few years, that can turn carbon dioxide into ingredients that can be used, for example, for textiles, that can be used, for example, for advanced materials in the context of mattresses, for example, that people are using to sleep on, and so on and so forth. So we have developed a process to make the greenhouse gas a key raw material for our production. And that innovation in chemical terms came at light speed, because only a couple of years after we had the idea, we have already installed a pilot plant next to this city where I'm sitting right now, where we produce already 5,000 tons of that material and replacing about 1,000 tons of crude oil as a feedstock by carbon dioxide. So that shows you that you can be quick. And that also has been a project that has been publicly funded in parts. So there is a golden opportunity, I think, if we really work hand in hand, if we also de-risk some of the projects and investments in this context, then we can also be pretty successful and also can be also commercially pretty successful, and not only look at how we save the climate and how we save the planet.
Thank you very much. And with this, with your answer, we are moving to the third phase of this discussion. This is the question from the audience. And I'll be reading out the questions, the one of the most highest ranked in the chat. And we'll start with a question from Manas Goyal from Berlin, and current undergraduate student at the LSE. He makes a statement. Sustainability exists if present needs are met when future economic, environmental, and social needs are not compromised. How do corona debt figures display sustainable financing if the coming generation will have to bear the burden? What are the future undertakings the EU decides to take up as such to limit this burden? I guess we can broaden this question, and whoever from the panelists want to take it, please answer, because we can treat it basically as what kind of a burden will be brought by the current state of being, by the debt caused by corona, and what kind of sustainable future we can build. It's very vague, very broad question. So please select what you want to answer on it. Is any of the panelists willing to answer this question?
If you want me to start, but I'm sure Mr. Brinkhouse will want to come in on this as well, because this debt issue is, of course, a huge burden on every politician who takes such a decision. We shift burdens to the next generation. On the other hand, the question is not necessarily, do we go too much into debt? The question is, what do we do with this money? Where does it go to? Do we invest into productivity growth, competitiveness, and the future revenues? Or do we invest basically into more or less consumptive activities? This is the key thing, and that was also makes me nervous in the context of the big recovery package of the European Union. I'm not horrified by the huge amounts. I'm horrified by the idea that people might get used to this. And secondly, I'm horrified by the idea that people might be tempted to channel this money into not very productive or productivity enhancing activities. These are my main concerns, not the debt itself. What we also need to leave to the next generations is an economy that is strong, productive, and competitive.
Thank you very much,
yes.
Mr.
Yes, sorry, I would totally agree to Werner Hoyer, and we used to be in a coalition government some years ago. So there's not a piece of paper between us within this question. We cannot reduce the burden for the next generation on climate issues. We have also other issues. We have to be competitive. We have to have a stable society. This is very important, and therefore the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations do not cover only innovation, do not cover only clean air and clean water and climate change, but do also cover, for example, poverty, because if you do not have a stable, resilient society, you will not have the chance to do other efforts within other fields. And so we have to balance everything. But the big temptation with debt, with public debt, is not to use it for the future, but to use it for a comfortable life and presence in today. This is really the challenge every politician has, to say, okay, we have to postpone something, and not everybody will be fine with everything, because we have also to keep in mind the future generations. So as a good politicians, you are not only making politics for the current generation, but also for the future generation. But this is very hard. We haven't been totally successful by this, but we are improving.
Thank you for this frank statement at the end. Mr. Steilemann, do you want to add something from the private sector perspective on this?
No, actually, I think everything has been said, but not necessarily by everyone. But for this time, I refrain from making additional comments, because I think the two very distinguished gentlemen are way more competent on that than I could ever be. So.
Okay, the second question is directed to Mr. Brinkhaus from Albrecht Freihaar, a Hermann, student at VVU Münster. You stated your belief that the state should not use regulations to force the private sector to diverge from the carbon-intensive status quo and rather trust market forces to do the work. How do you make sure that Germany does not fall behind countries such as China, but also the UK, which recently made their U-turns on the matter of regulating the transition to a green economy? Mr. Brinkhaus?
Yeah, thank you very much. So it was a provoking thesis from my side. And of course, you need a baseline of regulations. This is no question, but I guess it's better to have incentives. It's better to have market incentives. And therefore, the decision we have to take within the next not only years, but months is what will be the best way to reach our targets. And I do not believe that we will reach our targets only with regulation because, and this is very decisive, we have to organize a broad majority within our people regarding this way. And we have to keep in mind also the people working in the automotive sector, the people working in other industries. And therefore, in only to say, okay, you are not allowed to do this, you are not allowed to do that. I guess this is a short-term thinking. So we have to organize a broad majority. Therefore, we have to organize incentives, and we have to do a little regulation. But I guess the main tool to reach our targets will not be regulation. And in the field of financial markets, I know that there are some efforts to say to the banks, to the insurance companies, you have to invest a certain amount of your money into this field, into that field. But the question is, where do you start and where do you end? You start, for example, you say, okay, you do not have to invest into carbon business and things like that. Then the next political party say, oh, but for me, it's important to have gender equality. And the next party is coming in to say, no, we have all to think to the countries in Africa. And everybody is right. But then the allocation of capital is only driven by political approaches and not by the markets. And therefore, I really say, okay, we need a baseline of regulation, but we need a lot of technology and markets.
Thank you very much. President Hoyer, do you want to add anything on this subject?
May I just say one sentence in addition to what Mr. Brinkhouse has already said? It is important that we stay curious and technology open. Whenever politicians believe that they have found the technological solution, I'm getting very nervous. So I would never put in a situation of uncertainty. And that's what it is. This is not a situation of risk, it's a situation of uncertainty. And the difference between uncertainty and risk is very clear to every economist. That is necessary not to put all the eggs into one basket.
Thank you very much.
If I can add something, sorry to say it, I guess this is totally perfect because a lot of private investors will have a diversity of technological innovative approaches and not putting all the eggs or all the apples into one basket. And this is a temptation for the public sector to say, okay, hydrogen is everything. Yeah, perhaps, but perhaps not. And so I guess I totally agree to Werner Hoyer. We have to keep open-minded into this field.
Thank you very much. With this, we have many questions directed to you, Mr. Brinkhaus, and these are really good questions, so I cannot tempt myself but just to ask you another question. This is a question from Nicholas Gastreiter. He is a research analyst at the LSE. You mentioned, Mr. Brinkhaus, that emissions trading scheme can be a solution. Could you explain whether the extra carbon charge should be paid by companies or consumers? How can be ensured that the carbon price is not fully passed on to consumers, but creates incentives for companies to invest into low carbon technologies? It would be great if you could comment on this in the context of the recently introduced German CO2 price for companies from the transport and the heating sectors. So just before you start answering this, I think on the EU level, we can also, if you have the willingness, President Hoyer, to address it later on, also from the company level, if you can have this perspective, because I'm afraid this will be the last question in this panel. And over
so perhaps
to you.
we start with Mr. Steilemann, because he is a company, and I guess there is no one who can better answer the question who would take the burden for the higher prices, the consumers or the companies. I'm afraid if it works like it should work, nobody will take it. But I'm very curious regarding the answer of Markus Steilemann.
This is a very diplomatic move. Over to you, Mr. Steilemann.
No, I think the key challenge that we always try to divide society. We say, well, the companies, we say, well, the consumers, but in the end of the day, I think we have to be very cautious about this because it drives people apart. And today I'm a consumer myself, right? So, but I'm also an employee of a company, and then I'm also a CEO of a large international chemical corporation. So I have 3 heads already for myself, and that is, by the way, the same for everyone. And in the end of the day, somebody has to pay the bill. The question is just how much are we distributing to whom? And sometimes you can say, well, there's smaller shoulders and there's stronger shoulders. And I think we have gone a long way to really find the best way, in particular, I would say in Germany and more so also in Europe, to distribute the respective transitionary costs to those shoulders who can actually bear more and to those shoulders who are stronger. And in that context, please do not forget, if you talk about companies, you talk also about hundreds of thousands small and mid-sized entities. You not only talk about the typical suspect of large international global corporations. And let's say by and large, I would say most of them are doing an excellent job to providing value to the society by paying their tax, by paying very decent wages also for highly qualified jobs and salaries for highly qualified jobs. So I think that's why this discussion about who now should pay for higher, let's say, carbon dioxide prices is a little bit derailing, and it is actually moving away from the real matter. And the real matter for me is that we finally get green energy up and running. We're talking about stepping out of fossil fuels rather yesterday than tomorrow, but at the same time, we are failing miserably to build sustainable energy sources and also build them where they can be produced most effectively. And that is those areas where you have a lot of wind and where you have a lot of sun. And that is most likely not the middle European regions we are currently living in. And that also makes it so expensive. So we need to think across borders. We need to think about also across sectors. And in that context, we can also solve the issue, because even if we would pay a little bit more, also consumers, for, let's say, the carbon dioxide prices, we can also give back the money somewhere else, for example, by reducing income tax, or by reducing, for example, consumption tax, for example, VAT, which would immediately also have a stimulus effect. So just saying, well, companies should pay more or consumers should pay more, I think that falls short of describing the complexity that we're in.
Thank you. Again, diplomatic answer. Mr. Brinkhouse, back to you.
Yeah,
just
one point, and I guess Markus Steilemann is absolutely right. So I guess we have to distinguish, and we have 2 boxes. One box is the burden on carbon consumption, and the second box is a redistribution issue, the social issue. And I guess first of all, we have to solve this carbon reducing issue. And then the next point is a redistribution issue. And to mix it, this will be misleading. And therefore, I guess the pricing by this emission trading of carbon consumption is absolutely right. And we will have higher prices and shortening the volume of carbon. And on the other hand, we have to solve the social issues, but we have to solve it into another box.
Thank you very much. President Hoyer, do you want to add something to this or comment?
Just would like to say, if an emission trading system leads, if it functions, it leads to the best thinkable results, because that is the clearest, intellectually clearest economic solution. However, it does not always work. And as long as it doesn't work, we must find other ways to internalize external effects. There we are not good at. And in this constant, for instance, the carbon price that we put on top is too low in order to reach the climate objectives. This is why we see this increasing over the next years and decades considerably, so that there is an incentive to move out of old technologies. And on the other side, moving to new technologies, there I can only encourage the Europeans to take the lead, because we must make a business case out of our technology and not shy behind the competition from others. We must be the leaders on this. And this is why Africa is so particularly important. This is the continent where probably this decision will, at the end of the day, be taken. Also, when we want to move from dirty hydrogen to green hydrogen, which is one of the biggest challenges.
You said a very important thing. The very important word is the hydrogen, because with this question, we are ending our panel of today. But to do the proper closing of the panel, I want you to ask a very short question, to each of you the same question. What is the technology of tomorrow that will build the sustainable future, sustainable societies, sustainable economies? What's the one key technology? President Hoyer?
Knowledge.
Mr. Brinkhouse?
It's not a question of technology, it's a question of being open-minded, being curious, and be open for new developments. I do not know what will be the key technology within 10 or 15 years, but I know one thing: we have to move.
Mr. Steilemann?
Education.
Okay. With this, I want to thank you very much for today's panel. This was absolutely outstanding, both your interventions and your answers to many challenging questions. Thank you, President Hoyer. Thank you, Mr. Brinkhouse, and thank you, Mr. Steilemann. And with this, I'm giving back the floor to the Mario from LSC. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the audience for being and staying with us.